It was just 100 years ago. A young man was born to a small village in Limpopo. At the time, the things he thought about doing were not only impossible, but could barely be dreamed of by someone that looked like him. So, he kept the ambition to heart, but always kept the dream alive. Many years later, he migrated to the city of opportunities, Egoli, the place of gold, they call it. As he arrived here, he set about his journey to become a businessman. It's funny that the things you and I take for granted today as young people, the opportunities we are birthed every day, even the things about which we moan, for that young man were the place of gold. Today, if you drive into that beautiful metropoli that is Soweto, it houses over 2 million people. On the main road, you see a mall built in his name. We celebrate it, even today in 2020, but it took him 100 years. The thing about being a young person, isn't it, is that we have the energy of the day, but often we lack the context of the moment. It's often about how we frame what we see. And how we frame what we see infers how we act in the time. Everything you look at is a function of how you perceive it. And there are different types of perspectives, and how you see things is how you act in front of the things that you see. Think about it this way. There are different types of sights, right? If you think about it, but there's different types of sights. There's things that are in plain sight, things that are hindsight, and often hindsight gives you insight. Listen, guys, let me break it down. Hindsight is the stuff we know based on what we've experienced. The expression reads, hindsight is 20/20. The idea is once you've seen it happen, you can always think, I would have seen that happen, but you didn't. That's the point. Plain sight is the stuff right in front of you. If you're a young person growing up in South Africa today, let me tell you what is plain sight for you. 29% unemployment by the narrow definition, over 41% by the broad definition. And that's pre-COVID. After this, it'll probably likely be over 42% narrow definition unemployment. For young black females under the age of 35 living in the northern provinces, that number is well over 56%. It's easier in South Africa for a young black female to be a victim of gender-based violence than to get a job. That's plain sight. Insight is based on the stuff that I've given you. What do you know? And what do you learn from what you know? But all of these, hindsight, insight, and plain sight, still only speak about how you frame the context, the environment that you're in. See, for the young man I'm speaking about, a person I had the privilege of being mentored by, Dr. Richard Maponya, he couldn't live in the world of hindsight, insight, and foresight. He had to live in the world of foresight, the world that was coming. So what do you believe about the world that's coming? What do you see in terms of the opportunities that are going to be presented to you? Are you preparing yourself every day as a young person? Here's the thing about resilience that people miss. Resilience is not about your ability to endure the moment. Resilience is about your ability to endure the moment because of your belief about the future. See, if you miss the second part of that statement, then enduring the moment isn't resilience, it's suffering. And you can suffer in perpetuity under the illusion of preparation without seeing a destination. So, foresight is what we believe is around the corner. What are the opportunities that are going to be presented to you and I as young people? Richard Maponya's journey started 100 years ago. But even by the 70s, the countries he was still living in wasn't exactly the kind of country where you had ample opportunities as a young black person. So if you're watching this and you're a young black person in South Africa today, and you're worried about the opportunities you have, I want you to realize something. That of every single generation that's come before you, you might not have the most opportunities of all the races, but you have the best opportunities ever for any person of color in this country. It has to be about how you're framing the moment. And how you frame the moment is what you choose to see. Personal story. So it's about 9 years ago, and I have this vision, this idea, this dream, that I would love to start a fund to finance small business people of color. It's just an idea. It's a dream. And so we set about doing it. The first 5 years of that journey was as close to hell as anything I've ever experienced. First, the environment you're in is not built for you to succeed in it. Second, because what you're doing is new, there's no rules. And third, if there are no rules for what you're doing, then how do you know you're not breaking the rules that already exist? See, the journey to setting new boundaries, the journey to constantly pushing the envelope, the journey to constantly and consistently achieving what's new is often about doing things that have never been done before. And to do that means you have to break the rules you didn't even know exist. So as a firm, we did. We broke all the rules around licensing, all the rules around capital distribution, all the rules around how do you perform a due diligence. We broke all the rules. Today, they study us and they call it innovation. Back then, they chastised us and said we're operating outside of the rules framework. The only reason we kept going was because we had a particular view of the future. We saw things as they were going to be, not as they were. So, in South Africa, yours and my beautiful country, the Rainbow Nation is what they call us. Well, let's examine the data about the rainbow. 55 million citizens, 76% of them Black African, 82% Black by the broad definition. Here are the facts. There are 4 large banks. 5, if you're generous. There are 7 large clothing retailers. 9 large and listed real estate investment trusts. See, we think we live in a country that's got a broad base of opportunities, but that's not really the case. And by the way, those who want you to believe different would have you believe that that's just the way the market exists. It's the way it's built. It's the way the system is supposed to be. It's not. Let's travel north of here. Go to Kenya. 44 million citizens. The Kenyan middle class is only 25% the size of our own. Yet even with that, a country with a middle class a quarter the size of ours, with 44 million people, they have 40 banks. We've got 4. They've got 18 large clothing retailers. We've got 7. And I could keep going on and on and on. So if you're a young person living today and you're living for yourself and for this moment, you're completely missing the point. You're missing the opportunity. You're missing what's around the corner. What's around the curve? Let's talk a bit about corners and curves. The main premise of my economic argument is that as young people today, our premise of relevance and resilience has to be about what we see around the corner of opportunities today. And that if you imagine as a young person, it's going to be easy, you're sorely mistaken. It's going to be hard. It's going to take time. And all systems have a natural inbuilt resistance mechanism. Nothing changes by itself. Change is forced. Having made my economic argument, let's look at the social argument now. Just follow me on this. Humor me. See if it works. See, the way exclusion works is it builds structures of exclusion and systems of oppression. I promise you, this is important. So follow me. Every single node of exclusion in an environment is built into a structure. That's how it works. The structures aren't always biased, certainly not at the face of it. If you look at the structure, you wouldn't understand why that structure is necessarily biased. So if you read the book, The Memoirs of Verwoerd, the architect of our past, apartheid, he writes in the book very eloquently about how to construct these structures of exclusion in such a way that it's difficult, even for the excluded, to deconstruct them. See, here's the way the South African system is built. On the one end, you have the leafy suburbs, and on the other, you have the townships. Next to the suburbs, you have the CBD, the Central Business District. Next to every single township, you have an industrial area. There's only one township in South Africa, in fact two, that break this construct. The first is Alex. That's because the rate at which Alex grew meant that the township grew into the industrial area. And the second is Diepsloot. And the only reason that is because Diepsloot was basically started after 1994. But every single township in South Africa that existed pre-94 exists right next to an industrial area. Why do you think that is? Because the structure of exclusion said this: take the black African person and put them in the township. Give them a level of education that is subpar. That meant the only jobs open to them would be factory jobs in the industrial areas. What that meant is you could pay them less than decent wages. If you lower the costs of production, you make the South African economy competitive, which meant it could supply goods into the CBD and sell those goods from the CBD into the leafy suburbs. That's the way the system was built. That's the structure. So when you drive into every township in South Africa today and you see each and every single one of those factories on your way in, that's not there by natural market design. It's built that way. But if this is the case, and my argument is that it is, then as young people today, how do we rethink, reframe, and restart the context of yours and my country? How do we rethink, reframe, and restart the opportunities for each and every single one of us? In the same book, Verwoerd says, make the roads in the townships narrow, make the houses low. But here was perhaps the most insightful part of what he wrote in that book. He says, make sure there are no billboards in townships. Why? Because billboards force people to look up. And if you look up, you might just raise your horizons. You might begin to think, to dream, to reimagine. So you and I were supposed to grow up in an environment that was cluttered, clustered, and uninhabitable. We were supposed to be given an education that made us second-grade citizens. We were supposed to work in the factories so that we couldn't imagine being in the services economy or the professional economy. That's what we were destined for. But that was built. That's how the structure was designed. And you and I can redesign it today, but it's going to take a bit more than a tweet, a bit more than a hashtag, a bit more than a comment in this video. And then what you do, and this is the second point, is you build systems of oppression. Now, the systems of oppression works is they generally are very smart, very sophisticated, genius, quiet, and subtle. Here's a good system of oppression. In most townships in South Africa, not until the year 2008, it was difficult to find people who lived in those townships that had title deeds to their homes. Even worse, many people don't know, but the registry of title deeds didn't have valuations for the properties of people living in those townships. So let's imagine your great-grandfather lives you a home in a township somewhere, and you decide you want to start a business. Better still, you want to get a loan so that you can take yourself to school. If you took the title deed to the bank, they wouldn't be able to finance it. Why? Because there was no notional value attached to the title deed in the township you grew up in. Even though it's an asset, it was assumed at zero rate. It's changed since then, but this is the way the system was built. Now, you and I could, of course we could, make a song and dance about it and jump up and down about it. But the real thing we should do is we should think about that system of exclusion and how do we rethink it? How do we reframe it? How do we restart?